Stealing $3 million usually requires a team of heavily armed professionals, months of meticulous planning, and a very fast getaway car. But on a blistering Friday morning in Las Vegas, a 21-year-old woman pulled off one of the largest heists in American history simply by putting her car in drive and stepping on the gas. On October 1, 1993, Heather Tallchief parked a heavily armored Loomis truck outside the Circus Circus casino. In the back of that truck was $3,100,000 in crisp bandit cash. Her two armed coworkers stepped out of the vehicle and walked into the neon-lit casino to refill the ATMs. Heather was the driver. She was supposed to wait by the curb. Instead, she gently pulled the truck into the heavy Vegas traffic, drove away in broad daylight, and vanished completely off the face of the earth for 12 long years. This is not a traditional story about a bank robber. Heather did not want to be rich, and she had zero criminal record. This is a story about deep psychological manipulation, bizarre occult brainwashing, and a master manipulator who turned a vulnerable young woman into a perfectly compliant remote-controlled weapon. To explain how a young woman managed to disappear with $3 million and avoid the FBI for years, we have to return to the moment everything changed. We have to rewind the clock to a dimly lit bar in San Francisco, where a lost soul met a very dangerous poet. In the early 1990s, Heather Tallchief was a textbook target for a predator. She was young, deeply insecure, and running from a very troubled childhood. She had endured a rough upbringing in New York, struggled with substance abuse, and eventually fled to San Francisco looking for a fresh start. She found a job working as a nursing assistant, but she was incredibly lonely and desperately searching for a sense of purpose. When Heather met Roberto in a San Francisco bar, he did not look like a criminal mastermind. He was 48 years old, more than twice her age, and introduced himself as Julius Chabo. He was charming, articulate, and carried an aura of deep, mysterious wisdom. He told her he was a poet, a mystic, and a practitioner of alternative spirituality. Heather was immediately captivated. Roberto showered her with the exact kind of attention and validation she had been craving her entire life. He made her feel seen. He made her feel important. But Roberto Solis was not just a romantic eccentric poet. He was a convicted murderer. 24 years earlier, in 1969, Roberto had attempted to rob an armored car in San Francisco. During the botched heist, he shot and killed a security guard named Louis Dakes. Roberto was caught, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. While behind bars, he completely reinvented himself. He began writing poetry under the pen name Pancho Aguila. His work gained significant traction in the outside world, earning him awards and catching the attention of prominent writers and activists. They viewed him as a brilliant artist who had been reformed by the penal system. Thanks to a highly successful letter-writing campaign by his literary supporters, Roberto was granted parole in 1992. The prison system believed he was a rehabilitated poet. In reality, he was a hardened, highly calculating killer who had spent 23 years sitting in a cell, figuring out exactly what went wrong during his first armored car robbery. When he looked at 21-year-old Heather Tallchief, he did not see a girlfriend. He saw a second chance. Roberto moved Heather into his apartment, and the psychological hijacking began immediately. He didn't just ask her to rob a bank, he rewired her entire reality. Roberto introduced Heather to a bizarre world of occultism, tarot cards, and sex magic. He isolated her from her friends and family, slowly becoming the only voice of authority in her life. He convinced her that he had supernatural abilities. He used guided meditations and deep hypnotic suggestions to break down her self-esteem. He told her they were spiritually bonded, and that the universe had a grand specific destiny for them. He brought her crystals, read her astrological charts, and fed her a constant stream of hallucinogenic drugs to keep her completely detached from reality. Once Heather was fully dependent on him, Roberto planted the seed. He told her that the universe wanted them to strike back at the corrupt capitalist system. He laid out a plan to rob an armored car company. But because his face and fingerprints were permanently burned into every law enforcement database in the country, he couldn't do it himself. Heather had to be the inside man. Robbing an armored car company sounds incredibly difficult, but Roberto knew a very dark, humorous truth about the security industry. The people driving millions of dollars around the city are usually paid slightly more than minimum wage. Roberto instructed Heather to apply for a job as a driver at Loomis Armored Inc. If you are a corporate security company handling millions of dollars in untraceable cash, you would assume the background check process is rigorous. Loomis pulled Heather's file. They saw a 21-year-old woman with a clean criminal record. They issued her a uniform, handed her the keys to a heavily armored truck, and trusted her with a loaded firearm. What Loomis completely failed to check was who she went home to every night. If a single investigator had run a background check on the man living in her apartment, red flags would have shattered the windows. They would have realized they just handed the keys to their vault to the live-in girlfriend of a man who had murdered a Loomis armored car guard 24 years earlier. But nobody checked. With Heather successfully inside the company, the couple relocated to Las Vegas. Las Vegas is the cash capital of the world. Every single day, millions of dollars in paper currency move from the casino floors to the counting rooms, and armored trucks circle the neon strip like sharks in a feeding frenzy. Roberto rented a small nondescript warehouse space just off the Vegas Strip. He spent weeks meticulously mapping out the escape route, securing fake passports, and building the disguises they would need to bypass airport security. He told Heather exactly what to do, exactly when to do it, and exactly how they were going to disappear. All Heather had to do was wait for the perfect Friday morning, put the truck in drive, and leave her coworkers behind. The morning of October 1st, 1993, felt like any other routine Friday in Las Vegas. The desert sun was already baking the pavement, and the casinos were buzzing with early morning gamblers. At exactly 8:15 a.m., Heather Tallchief steered her heavy reinforced Loomis armored truck toward the valet parking area of the Circus Circus Hotel and Casino. In the back of the vehicle sat a little fortune, over $3 million in $20 and $100 bills, neatly banded and stacked. Her two senior partners, fully armed and completely unaware of what was about to happen, stepped out of the truck. Their job was to walk inside the casino, crack open the ATMs, and refill the machines with fresh cash for the weekend rush. Standard protocol dictated that Heather, the junior driver, stay behind the wheel. She was supposed to slowly circle the block or park near the front entrance, keeping the engine running and the doors locked until her partners returned. The two guards walked through the glass doors of Circus Circus, disappearing into the flashing lights of the slot machines. Heather was finally entirely alone. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Roberto Solis's voice echoed in her head, reminding her of the spiritual mission they were destined to complete. She put the heavy truck into gear, checked her mirrors, and simply merged back into the busy Las Vegas traffic. When her partners walked back out to the curb 20 minutes later, they stood on the sidewalk, looking up and down the street. They weren't immediately panicked. They figured Heather had hit a bad traffic light, or maybe she had driven around the corner to grab a cup of coffee. It took them over an hour to finally call the police and admit they had lost a 10-ton truck and $3 million. By the time the Las Vegas police realized the robbery had occurred, Heather was already gone. Driving a stolen armored vehicle through a crowded city is usually a terrible idea. They are large, incredibly slow, and highly noticeable. But Roberto Solis had planned for this exact problem weeks in advance. He had instructed Heather to drive the Loomis truck directly to a nondescript commercial warehouse just a few miles off the Las Vegas Strip. If anyone saw an armored truck pull into a random warehouse, they might call the police. So, Solis had rented the space under a brilliant, perfectly legal disguise. He registered a fake business that specialized in retrofitting and repairing armored security vehicles. When Heather pulled the Loomis truck through the large bay doors, the neighboring businesses didn't bat an eye. They just assumed the local repair shop was taking in a new client. Once the heavy garage doors rolled shut, the illusion of the romantic spiritual crusade instantly shattered, replaced by the cold, hurried reality of a major heist. Solis was waiting inside. They cracked open the back of the truck and stared at the mountain of currency. $3 million is not something you can easily throw into a backpack. It is heavy, bulky, and quite difficult to move. The FBI later calculated that carrying that much cash would require at least 8 to 10 large pieces of luggage. Heather assumed they were going to pack the money into the getaway car and drive into the sunset together. But Solis had a different plan. He pulled out cardboard boxes and packing materials, hastily shoving the vast majority of the cash into shipping crates. When Heather asked him what he was doing with the money, Solis brushed her off. He told her not to worry about it. He told her it was safe, that he had everything completely under control, and that she just needed to focus on the escape. He sealed the boxes, slapped shipping labels on them, and sent them millions of dollars to an unknown destination. To this day, nobody knows exactly where those boxes went. With the money shipped away, the couple had to get out of Las Vegas before the FBI locked down the airports. The police had her full name, her age, her physical description, and her photograph. They also quickly pieced together her inner circle, and the alert went out. Law enforcement was already searching for a specific duo, a 21-year-old female and an older Hispanic male. Walking through a commercial airport terminal was out of the question. Solis broke out the disguises. He wasn't just putting on a fake mustache, he engineered a full theatrical production. He handed Heather a wheelchair, a pair of thick glasses, and heavy makeup. He instructed the healthy young 21-year-old to completely transform herself into a frail, sickly elderly woman. Solis then put on a sharp suit, adopting the persona of a dedicated, caring doctor, traveling with his invalid patient. They left the warehouse, abandoning the empty Loomis truck, and headed to a small private airfield. They didn't buy commercial tickets. Solis used a fraction of the stolen cash to charter a private jet. When they arrived at the tarmac, the disguise worked flawlessly. The flight crews saw an older gentleman gently pushing his sick elderly patient up the ramp. Nobody asked for rigorous identification. Nobody searched their 3 small carry-on bags. The jet engines roared to life, and the plane lifted off the runway, banking east toward Denver, Colorado. This is the Heist Vault. Behind every heist there's a story. Some end in prisons, some end in graves, and some simply disappear. As the private jet soared thousands of feet above the American Southwest, Heather Tallchief looked out the window. She was wearing old lady makeup, sitting next to a convicted murderer, fleeing the FBI with nothing but the clothes on her back. This was the exact moment the hypnotic spell began to break. For months, Solis had promised her a spiritual awakening. He promised her they were striking back at a corrupt system, and that the universe would protect them. But sitting in that cabin, listening to the hum of the jet engines, Heather realized she was entirely at his mercy. She had committed the federal crime. Her face was on the Loomis employment file. Her fingerprints were on the steering wheel of the abandoned truck. Solis had brilliantly orchestrated the entire thing so that Heather took 99% of the legal risk, while he maintained 100% of the financial control. Denver was only a brief stopover. From there, the fugitive couple bounced to Florida, then to the Caribbean, and eventually across the Atlantic Ocean, landing in Amsterdam. They had successfully pulled off one of the greatest vanishing acts in criminal history. The FBI was completely stumped. The trail went ice cold. But for Heather Tallchief, the nightmare was just beginning. She had outrun the federal government, but she was now trapped in a foreign country with a deeply manipulative and highly dangerous man who controlled every single penny of her stolen fortune. Amsterdam is a beautiful historic city, but when you are a fugitive running from the United States government, it quickly turns into a very cold, highly paranoid prison. When Heather and Roberto finally settled in the Netherlands under assumed names, the romantic illusion of their spiritual crusade completely evaporated. Roberto dropped the loving mystical poet persona and revealed his true nature. He was a deeply selfish, controlling criminal who now held all the cards. Roberto controlled the bank accounts, the fake passports, and the daily schedule. Despite sitting on a fortune of $3 million, he gave Heather a painfully small allowance. He doled out just enough cash for groceries, forcing her to ask his permission for every single purchase. He weaponized the money to keep her entirely dependent on him. If she tried to leave, she would have no cash, no real identification, and the FBI waiting to throw her in a federal penitentiary for the rest of her life. She was trapped. And then, the situation became infinitely more complicated. Heather discovered she was pregnant. In 1994, Heather gave birth to a baby boy. Becoming a mother fundamentally changes a person's brain chemistry, and for Heather, it acted like a violently cold splash of water to the face. She looked at her infant son and realized she could not raise a child in a world built on lies, fake names, and the constant suffocating fear of a police raid. Roberto, on the other hand, had zero interest in playing the role of a dedicated family man. The crying baby annoyed him. The domestic life bored him. He started disappearing for days at a time, spending the stolen money on his own lavish lifestyle and bringing other women back to their shared apartment. Eventually, the master manipulator decided he no longer needed his pawn. Roberto packed his bags, took the remaining stolen fortune, and simply walked out the door. Out of the $3.1 million they stole together, he left 22-year-old Heather with barely $1,000. The man who orchestrated the entire Circus Circus heist vanished into the European underground, taking the fortune with him, leaving her completely alone with a newborn baby, a fake identity, and barely enough cash to cover a month of groceries. Most criminals who get abandoned without money usually get caught within a few weeks. They make a desperate phone call home, or they try to cross a border, and the authorities instantly sweep them up. But Heather Tallchief did not get caught. She survived in the shadows for 12 whole years. She moved into a cramped apartment in the red light district of Amsterdam. To feed her son, she worked exhausting under-the-table jobs. She cleaned hotel rooms as a maid, and occasionally worked as an escort, constantly terrified that a client or a boss might ask too many questions about her background. Every single day was a masterclass in paranoia. If she saw a police officer walking down the street, her heart leaped into her throat. If there was an unexpected knock on her door, she assumed it was Interpol ready to kick the hinges off. She couldn't call her family in the United States. She couldn't tell her friends the truth. But the hardest part wasn't the paranoia. It was watching her son grow up. By 2005, her boy was 10 years old. He was a smart kid, but he was living a ghost story. He didn't have a real nationality. He couldn't travel. He couldn't participate in normal activities because his mother was terrified of filling out government paperwork. Heather looked at her 10-year-old son and realized that if she kept running, she was going to ruin his life just like Roberto had ruined hers. She decided it was time to stop running. In September 2005, federal prosecutors and FBI agents in Las Vegas were going about their standard routine week. The Heather Tallchief case was completely ice-cold. Law enforcement had spent over a decade hunting her, running down false leads and dead ends all across the globe. Then, the front doors of the Las Vegas federal courthouse swung open. A 33-year-old woman walked into the lobby, approached the front desk, and politely informed the stunned receptionist that she was the armored car driver who stole $3 million from Circus Circus 12 years ago. It is incredibly rare for a successful fugitive to voluntarily turn themselves in. The federal agents were entirely caught off guard. In a hilarious display of irony, Heather revealed exactly how she got back into the country to get arrested. Because she didn't have a valid American passport, she had to use a highly illegal forged British passport just to sneak into the United States so she could turn herself into the FBI. She successfully smuggled herself into federal custody. When the judge asked her why she finally came back after outrunning the government for a decade, Heather's answer was simple, emotional, and undeniably human. "I'm doing this for my son," she told the court. "I want him to have a normal life. I want him to know who his mother really is." The justice system had a very complex puzzle to solve. Heather had undeniably committed a major federal crime. But the prosecutors and the judge also recognized the dark reality of her situation. They saw a woman deeply brainwashed by a highly dangerous predator. Most importantly, they saw a mother who voluntarily gave up her freedom solely to protect her child's future. In March 2006, the judge handed down a surprisingly lenient sentence, 63 months in federal prison. While Heather sat in a federal cell, her sacrifice paid off perfectly. Child Protective Services and the courts kept 10-year-old Dylan entirely out of the media spotlight. He was safely relocated to the United States. For the very first time in his life, he was allowed to use his real name, enroll in a normal school, and make friends without the constant paranoia of a police raid. In 2010, Heather walked out of the prison gates. She had surrendered at 33, and now, at 38 years old, she was finally completely free from the psychological grip of Roberto Solis and the legal hunt of the FBI. But the credits do not roll the moment you leave federal custody. The court system knew Roberto Solis took the fortune, but Heather was still legally responsible. The judge slapped her with a lifelong restitution order to repay Loomis Armored Inc. For the rest of her working life, a percentage of her legitimate paycheck is automatically carved out and sent back to the company. It is a permanent crime tax. Even though she quietly faded from the public eye and returned to the healthcare field to care for patients, she will carry that nearly $3 million financial anchor forever. Yet, if you look closely, Heather clearly won the long game. Dylan did not inherit the chaotic criminal life of his father. He thrived, officially graduating from college in 2019 and building a successful career in digital media. Heather fiercely protected the peace she had earned. When a major streaming network released a documentary series about the heist in 2021, Heather agreed to tell her story, but she refused to show her face on camera. In a brilliant, highly calculated move, she hired an actress to sit in the interview chair and lip-sync her recorded audio. As for Roberto Solis, whether he is living in luxury on a hidden beach or met a violent end in the criminal underworld, He probably spent the rest of his days looking over his shoulder, trapped in a paranoid exile of his own making. Heather Tallchief gave up the money, faced the music, and bought the one thing Roberto could never steal from her: a real future for her son. Roberto Solis pulled off the perfect disappearing act. Despite being featured on America's Most Wanted and pursued by international authorities, the poet-turned-mastermind was never seen again. The $3 million from the Circus Circus ATMs was never recovered. It remains one of the most successful unsolved financial crimes in Las Vegas history. When you are dealing with a manipulator as skilled as Roberto Solis, the rabbit hole always goes much deeper. We have heavily focused on how Roberto manipulated a 21-year-old girl. But to truly understand the terrifying genius of the man behind the Circus Circus heist, we have to look at his very first robbery. Long before he stole $3 million in Las Vegas, Roberto Solis pulled off an even greater heist. He stole his own freedom from the California penal system, and he did it using nothing but a pen and a typewriter. When Roberto was thrown into Folsom State Prison in the early 1970s for murdering armored car guard Louis Dakes, he was supposed to die behind bars. He was handed a life sentence. But Roberto quickly realized that the easiest way to escape a maximum security prison is not to dig a tunnel with a spoon. The easiest way is to convince the guards to simply open the front door and let you walk out. He adopted the pen name Pancho Aguila and started writing poetry. He didn't just write for himself. He aggressively marketed his work to the outside world. He tapped into the cultural and political movements of the 1970s and 1980s, writing verses about oppression, the prison industrial complex, and the human spirit. He managed to get his work published in underground literary magazines across San Francisco. He even won several prestigious writing awards. Soon, prominent authors, college professors, and civil rights activists were reading his books. They didn't see a cold-blooded killer. They saw a brilliant, misunderstood artist who had been thoroughly rehabilitated by the power of literature. These highly educated and wealthy intellectuals formed a committee. They launched a relentless years-long letter-writing campaign demanding his release. They flooded the California Parole Board with petitions, arguing that keeping such a beautiful artistic mind locked in a cage was a tragedy. In 1992, the Parole Board finally caved. They looked at the stacks of glowing recommendation letters from famous writers, stamped his paperwork, and released him. Roberto Solis completely conned the intellectuals of San Francisco. He played the role of the enlightened poet perfectly, right up until the heavy prison gates clicked shut behind him. The moment he was free, he dropped the poetry, walked into a bar, found a vulnerable 21-year-old girl named Heather Tallchief, and immediately started planning his next armored car robbery. One of the greatest lingering mysteries of the 1993 heist is what actually happened to the money. When you hear $3 million, it is easy to picture a neat little briefcase filled with crisp $100 bills, just like in a Hollywood spy movie. But reality is much heavier. Which is exactly why Roberto Solis could not bring the money on the private jet. When Heather watched him pack the money into cardboard shipping boxes at the Las Vegas warehouse, he was executing a highly calculated logistics maneuver. He used a freight shipping company to mail the boxes out of the country. But where did he mail them? The FBI has chased dozens of theories over the last 30 years. Some investigators believe Solis shipped the boxes to a corrupt bank in the Cayman Islands. Others theorize he mailed the crates to a trusted underworld contact in South America, knowing he and Heather would eventually flee Europe and head south. But the most humorous, highly plausible theory is that Solis simply mailed the boxes to a rented storage locker in a completely different European country under a fake name. He let the boxes sit in the dark for a few years, allowing the heat to die down, before quietly picking them up and walking away. So, where is Roberto Solis today? If he is still alive, he would be in his late 70s or early 80s. Over the decades, the FBI has received hundreds of tips. People have claimed to see him sipping coffee in a cafe in Nicaragua. Others swore they spotted him running a small bookstore in Brazil, or living quietly on a beach in Costa Rica. Every single lead has turned into a dead end. Law enforcement experts are deeply divided on his fate. Half of the investigators believe a guy with $3 million in untraceable cash easily bought a top-tier fake identity, underwent plastic surgery, and is currently living out his final days in total luxury. The other half of the investigators believe he is dead. The criminal underworld does not take kindly to people carrying millions of dollars in cash. Some agents theorize that Solis eventually crossed the wrong people in a foreign country and was quietly murdered for his fortune, suffering the exact same violent fate he inflicted on the armored car guard back in 1969. Whatever the truth is, Roberto Solis accomplished something almost no criminal ever achieves. He beat the system twice. He manipulated the state of California into letting him out of a life sentence, and he manipulated a young woman into handing him millions of dollars on a silver platter. Heather Tallchief served her time and rebuilt her life, finally stepping out of the shadow of the man who ruined her youth. She paid her debt to society. But the poet who orchestrated it all remains a ghost story, whispered in the halls of the Las Vegas Police Department. A chilling reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous weapon a bank robber can wield is just a few beautiful words. This is the Heist Vault. Subscribe for more true heists and robberies.